All right, well, let's get started now. Good morning, buenos dias. My name is Jared Genser, and I serve as international counsel to Nicaraguan presidential candidates Félix Maradiaga and Juan Sebastián Chamorro. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation. Our discussion this morning is on the record and it is being recorded. It will be made public on YouTube shortly thereafter, but we would request that no one live stream this briefing.
Buenos días. Me llamo Jared Genser y sirvo como el abogado internacional de los candidatos presidenciales nicaragüenses Félix Maradiaga y Juan Sebastián Chamorro. Les agradezco por su participación en esta conversación importante. Nuestra discusión de esta mañana está grabando, pero se hará público en YouTube brevemente, pero solicitamos que nadie transmita en vivo este informe.
Today marks 1 week since Nicaraguan authorities detained and disappeared Félix and Juan Sebastián and began holding them in violation of their fundamental rights under Nicaraguan and international law. These detentions are part of an escalating campaign of repression against the Nicaraguan opposition ahead of the November presidential elections. They are two of more than 130 political prisoners of President Ortega and his regime.
Hoy se cumple una semana desde que las autoridades nicaragüenses detuvieron y desaparecieron a Félix y a Juan Sebastián y comenzaron a detenerlos en violación de sus derechos fundamentales bajo el derecho nicaragüense e internacional. Estas detenciones son parte de una creciente campaña de represión contra la oposición nicaragüense antes de las elecciones presidenciales de noviembre. Son dos de más de 130 presos políticos del presidente Ortega y su régimen.
On the morning of June 8th, after a quote interview at the public ministry, Félix's vehicle was followed and eventually stopped by the National Police, at which point officers forcibly removed him from the vehicle, physically assaulted him, and took him away. Later that same day, a group of more than 40 armed National Police forced their way into Juan Sebastián's home in Managua and took him away. Their ongoing disappearances without access to family and counsel is a brazen violation of their rights under both Nicaraguan and international law.
En la mañana del 8 de junio, luego de una entrevista, entre comillas, en el Ministerio Público, el vehículo de Félix fue seguido e eventualmente parado por la Policía Nacional, momento en el cual los agentes sacaron a Félix del vehículo por la fuerza, lo agredieron físicamente y se lo llevaron. Más tarde, ese mismo día, un grupo de más de 40 miembros de la Policía Nacional armados usaron la fuerza para entrar en la casa de Juan Sebastián en Managua y se lo llevaron. Sus continuas desapariciones sin acceso a familiares y abogados constituyen una descarada violación de sus derechos en virtud del derecho internacional y del derecho nicaragüense.
I'm honored to represent these courageous men in their fight to restore freedom, democracy, and human rights to Nicaragua. And I am honored to be joined by their equally courageous wives here today, Berta, Valle, wife of Félix Maradiaga, and Victoria Cárdenas, wife of Juan Sebastián Chamorro. Contrary to the Ortega regime's desire to drive his opposition apart, his imprisonment of these two men and so many others is bringing his opponents together so that they can speak in one voice about what is necessary for the future of Nicaragua.
Es un honor para mí representar a estos valientes hombres en su lucha por restaurar la libertad, la democracia y los derechos humanos en Nicaragua. Es un honor para mí también estar acompañado hoy de sus igualmente valientes esposas, Berta Valle, esposa de Félix Maradiaga, y Victoria Cárdenas, esposa de Juan Sebastián Chamorro. Contrariamente al deseo del régimen de Ortega de separar a su oposición, el encarcelamiento de estos dos hombres y tantos otros está uniendo sus oponentes para hablar en una voz unida.
In just a moment, I will turn it over to Berta and Victoria to speak about their husbands and their vision for a just and inclusive Nicaragua. I will then offer some further remarks to provide more detail about the legal cases that have been brought against them. We'll then open the floor to questions from journalists who have joined this call. And with that, I'm very pleased to introduce Berta Valle, wife of Félix Maradiaga, who will be speaking first. She'll speak in Spanish and then in English. Thank you, Berta.
En solo un momento le daré la palabra a Berta y a Victoria para que hablen sobre sus maridos y sobre sus visiones de una Nicaragua justa e inclusiva. Luego yo ofrezco unos comentarios adicionales. Luego daremos la palabra a las preguntas de los periodistas que se han sumado a esta llamada. Y con eso es un honor para mí presentarles a Berta Valle, esposa de Félix Maradiaga, quien hablará primeramente en español y después en inglés. Gracias, Berta. Berta no se oye.
Now, well, good morning to everyone. Buenos días a todos. Thank you for being here with us. I really appreciate your support in this moment. Me siento muy agradecida por el apoyo que nos están dando y quiero extender un abrazo a Victoria y decirle que estoy con ella y con cada una de las familias de los presos políticos, que son más de 130 en este momento. I just want to say to Victoria that I bring her my solidarity in this moment, and I appreciate that we are joining this effort together. And I also send my solidarity to the more than 130 families of political prisoners in Nicaragua. Today, I also want to recognize Presidente Enrique Bolaños. He passed away yesterday. And even when he was not like the perfect president, we recognize that he have fought for democracy. He fought against the pact between Arnoldo Alemán and Daniel Ortega. So today for Nicaragua, it's a big loss, and I want to extend my solidarity with his family. Y quiero reconocer hoy el fallecimiento de el expresidente Enrique Bolaños. Reconocemos que quizás no fue un presidente perfecto, pero ciertamente luchó por la democracia. Fue una persona que luchó para detener la corrupción en el país y habló mucho acerca de el pacto entre Daniel Ortega y Arnoldo Alemán. Así que mi solidaridad para su familia. For now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Félix. I want to let you know a little bit about his story and the reason why he decided to get involved with the nonviolence and the defense of human rights. So Félix was born in Jinotega. He has two brothers, one sister and one brother. And he himself, he suffered from firsthand the struggle with war and violence. He saw the division of his family because of a different political view. So I'm going to say in Spanish now. Él sufrió los embates de la guerra, de la división de la familia. Él miró de primera mano cómo debido a la guerra su familia se separó, habían conflictos. De hecho, su padre fue también un prisionero político. Su papá estaba estudiando en Chile, regresó a Nicaragua y fue torturado. Y él desde pequeño fue testigo de cómo ese hecho marcaba la vida de las personas. Además, su familia sufrió confiscación. Sus bienes fueron expropiados. Miró cómo la familia de su mamá también sufrió mucho dolor con la desaparición de familiares, con pérdidas profundas que tuvieron también. Y luego su mamá, precisamente tratando de salvarlo del conflicto de la guerra en los años 80, se miró obligada a enviarlo a Estados Unidos como un menor de edad. Cruzó la frontera y estuvo aquí exiliado por un par de años. Así que su historia es lo que a él le movió para comprometerse con la defensa de los derechos humanos, con la lucha no violenta y la búsqueda de la libertad y la democracia. Voy a dejar a Michael para que traduzca esa parte y luego continuar contándoles un poco más acerca de este compromiso que él asumió.
Gracias, Berta. I will just pick up where you left off in English. For those speaking English, as you heard, Felix was born in Jinotega. He suffered firsthand during the war from the oppression of the war, especially with the divisions in his own family. The significant conflict was present in his family life. His father was also a political prisoner. His father studied in Chile, then returned to Nicaragua and was there tortured. So Felix saw from a very young age how the conflict was present in the country, but especially also in his family life. His mother suffered greatly from the stress of the war, but also of the disappearances of their family members. And for these reasons, Felix's mother sent him as a minor to the US, where he lived. He was an unaccompanied minor where he lived at the near the border for 2 years. And so these are the kinds of experiences in Felix's formative years as a young person that have really informed his dedication to human rights, democracy, and to nonviolent change.
Así que su regreso a Nicaragua siendo un adolescente, terminó sus estudios en Nicaragua y dedicó prácticamente toda su vida profesional al tema, ¿no?, de la búsqueda de la democracia, el servicio público. Él encontró una pasión muy particular con el tema de la desmovilización de excombatientes y participó en estos procesos de pacificación en el país. Eso le llevó a él a recorrer gran parte del país y reconocer de primera mano la situación en la que viven las comunidades más vulnerables. Y luego en su vida académica como profesor, dedicó más de 10 años en la formación de jóvenes, enseñándoles principios de la lucha no violenta, de la resistencia pacífica, del establecimiento de instituciones democráticas para lograr la gobernabilidad. Y como les decía, estos principios democráticos le nacieron a él, creo yo, precisamente por su historia, por lo que vivió. Y para mí es muy profundo porque va mucho más allá de la teoría, siendo él académico. Es basado en su experiencia. Y ahora recientemente, ¿verdad?, el régimen de Daniel Ortega, a quien ha estado denunciando desde que llegó al poder, advirtiendo que nos encaminábamos a una dictadura, ha querido formar una campaña de desinformación, acusándole de crímenes absurdos totalmente y poniendo en alto riesgo su vida. Él ha tenido amenazas constantes, ha sido golpeado en varias ocasiones, pero aún así, pues él ha estado comprometido con la causa y su compromiso le ha llevado ahora a estar técnicamente desaparecido. Nosotros tememos mucho por su bienestar porque sabemos, en base a antecedentes, de que en esas cárceles del régimen hay torturas, hay violaciones, no se respeta ningún tipo de derecho, y es por eso que esta mañana nuevamente yo alzo mi voz porque demando al Estado de Nicaragua mostrar a mi esposo, permitirnos verlo, saber cómo está, y también al resto de presos políticos cuyas familias tampoco tienen información de cómo se encuentran en este momento.
Felix returned to Nicaragua as an adolescent, where he finished his studies, especially around the areas where he dedicated himself to the struggle for democracy, civil engagement as well. He was also very involved in the effort, the demobilization of fighters, the pacification of the country in the post-conflict space. Through this work, Felix visited all regions of the country, especially those that were most marginalized. As a teacher, he brought these lessons and principles to the classroom, the principles of democracy and nonviolence. And Berta knows that all of these principles that Felix upheld in his academic life are rooted in the experiences that he had as a child. Now, the regime of Daniel Ortega has fomented a disinformation campaign. Felix has been under constant threats, but despite all of this, he has remained committed to the cause up until even the moment that he was disappeared last week. We worry very much for his safety and for his well-being. As many of you know, the prisons in Nicaragua are rife with torture and maltreatment and human rights violations. And we demand that the Nicaraguan state show us Felix to give us proof of his health and well-being, but also in the cases of all of the other political prisoners as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's what I wanted to share this morning with you.
Thank you so much, Berta, for those incredibly compelling and important remarks. I'll now turn it over to Victoria to speak about Juan Sebastián.
Gracias, Berta, por sus comentarios increíbles. Ahora tengo el honor de presentarles a Victoria Cárdenas, quien hablará a continuación.
Oh, you have to unmute.
Buenos días. El día de hoy yo hablo como esposa, hablo como madre y estoy aquí unida con Berta y con el resto de familiares de los presos políticos en este profundo sufrimiento por el secuestro de nuestros familiares. Desde que se llevaron a mi esposo, Juan Sebastián, no he tenido contacto con él, no lo he podido ver y mi familia y yo tememos por su seguridad y por su vida. Él tampoco se le ha negado el derecho a la defensa y él está totalmente incomunicado y sin asistencia legal. Se le están violando todos sus derechos humanos y su presunción de inocencia. Quiero decirles que Juan Sebastián es un patriota que siempre ha luchado por Nicaragua. Desde que yo lo conocí, hace más de 30 años, siempre ha querido estar aquí haciendo algo por su patria, por el desarrollo de Nicaragua, por la parte social, por la parte económica, para que sea un país próspero, donde todos los nicaragüenses podamos vivir con dignidad, en prosperidad, con seguridad y en paz. Mi esposo es un hombre pacífico, mi esposo es un hombre honesto, con valores profundos, que se ha dedicado estos últimos 3 años a luchar por su país. Eso es lo único que él ha hecho. Él es inocente y mi familia y yo exigimos que se libere y se presente, porque no lo hemos visto, como digo. La detención de mi esposo es totalmente ilegal y él se encuentra en indefensión total. Mi familia, además, ha sido por los últimos 3 años perseguida, acosada, enjuiciada por diferentes razones y hemos estado ahí, yo con él, denunciando estas cosas porque son injustas, no caben, son absurdas y nuestro propósito ha sido denunciar todo lo que nos han estado haciendo, nos han querido hacer y nos continúan haciendo. Ahora, con mi esposo secuestrado, mi familia todavía tiene un proceso civil abierto donde quieren confiscar todas nuestras propiedades y literalmente pues nos quieren dejar en la calle. Exigimos, reitero, su liberación, que se muestre, que nos los enseñen y que los liberen a él y a los más de 130 políticos que están en la cárcel desde estos últimos 3 años. Como dice mi esposo, nos mueve la esperanza y yo le quiero hablar a él directamente. Amor, yo quiero decirte que aquí estamos, la familia, tus amistades, Nicaragua entera, pendiente de vos, de Félix y del resto de presos políticos y del resto pensando en ustedes, luchando por ustedes, porque ustedes están del lado correcto, están del lado de la verdad, y nosotros vamos a pelear por sus derechos humanos. Y el día de hoy estamos haciendo un llamado a la comunidad internacional a que oiga esto y que nos apoyen, porque en Nicaragua lamentablemente no se respeta ninguna ley, no hay constitución y estamos en una indefensión total. Entonces, eso es lo que yo quería transmitirles y solidarizarme otra vez con Berta, con el resto de familias, porque lo que estamos viviendo literalmente es un infierno. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Victoria. Good morning. I speak today as a wife and a mother, and I appear here with Berta to discuss the disappearance of my husband, Juan Sebastián Chamorro, and the other political prisoners. Since his disappearance on June 8th, we have not had contact with my husband, Juan Sebastián, and his rights have been continuously violated. He has been without legal counsel. They are violating all of his rights, including to the presumption of innocence. Juan Sebastián is a patriot and has always fought for the betterment of Nicaragua since I have known him for the last 30 years. He fights for a Nicaragua where all Nicaraguans can live in peace and dignity. My husband is a decent and honest man and has spent 30 years fighting for his country. We demand that he is liberated and so that we can see him. The detention that he is under is completely illegal. My family for the last 3 years has been persecuted and threatened by the Nicaraguan government. We have always denounced these actions because they are absurd. We have rejected all that they have thrown at us, and we will continue to do so. Now that Juan Sebastián is detained, there is a civil case against us where they want to take everything away and leave us on the streets. We demand the liberation of Juan Sebastián, proof of his well-being, and the same for all political prisoners in Nicaragua. As Juan Sebastián has said, we are moved by hope. And now speaking directly to Juan Sebastián, we are behind you and fighting for you and for all of the political prisoners. You are on the right side, and we will continue fighting for your rights. We are calling on the international community to recognize the situation, the lack of the rule of law in Nicaragua, and to stand in solidarity with us. I express my solidarity with Berta and with the other families of the political prisoners, and I thank you for listening.
Great. Well, I want to first begin by thanking Berta and Victoria for sharing their testimonies with us. The grace, dignity, and courage with which you fight for your husband's freedom and that of other political prisoners is extraordinary, as is your solidarity with each other and on behalf of all of Nicaragua's political prisoners. In the week since their arrests, we have observed a series of disturbing developments in the cases of both Félix and Juan Sebastián, which constitute serious violations of Nicaraguan and international law. In Félix's case, he was beaten and detained without an arrest warrant on June 8th, and no one has seen or heard from him since. It's unclear where he's being held, and no one knows if he's receiving the medical attention that he needs. In Juan Sebastián's case, he was also taken from his home without a warrant on June 8th, and he has been denied access to his family and counsel. In fact, to make matters worse, now his lawyer has also disappeared. It's unclear where he is being held to. While in detention, both Félix and Juan Sebastián were reportedly brought separately before a judge in a secret hearing without their lawyers present. They have not been able to challenge the lawfulness of their arrest and detention, and it's not even clear they were present in the secret hearings. In both cases, a judge remanded both Félix and Juan Sebastián to 90 days of judicial detention for investigations into a wide array of spurious charges that were clearly pretextual and designed to discredit them and to make them ineligible to be able to run for president. These actions by the Ortega regime violate the protections included under Articles 9 and 14 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which Nicaragua is a state party. Nicaragua's constitution even reaffirms these international obligations in Article 46, which says, quote, all persons in the national territory shall enjoy state protection and recognition of rights inherent to the human person, as well as unrestricted respect, promotion, and protection of those rights, and the full applicability of the rights set forth in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights of the United Nations. Nicaragua is clearly breaking its obligations under its own constitution and international law. It is really stunning to reflect upon the reality that in just 1 week, both Félix and Juan Sebastián have been subjected to no less than 10 specific violations of their rights, as guaranteed by the Nicaraguan Constitution and international law. And these collectively demonstrate the impunity with which Ortega and his regime operate. First, both men were arrested without warrants. Their homes were searched without warrants. Second, both men were disappeared, taken into custody to unknown locations without any legal basis whatsoever. Third, both men have been without the ability to immediately access their counsel. In Juan Sebastián's case, his lawyer himself has disappeared. Fourth, both men are being able to have their family access them at their place of detention. Fifth, neither were brought before a judge and allowed to challenge the lawfulness of their detentions. Sixth, neither were given a fair or public hearing. Seventh, the judges they were brought before were neither independent nor impartial. They simply did Ortega's bidding. In Félix's case, it was Judge Henry Morales of the 6th Criminal District of Managua. In Juan Sebastián's, we don't even know who served as the judge. Eighth, both Félix and Juan Sebastián were presumed guilty rather than innocent, as is required by law, by being practically sentenced to 90 days in jail, despite having never been convicted of any crime. Vice President and First Lady Rosaria Murillo also referred to all the detained opposition leaders as, quote, terrorists and, quote, criminals, which constitutes an illegal interference with their cases because it puts pressure on the judiciary from the executive to convict them. Ninth, by being disappeared and held extra legally, both men are being subjected to cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment, which over time will constitute torture the longer it persists. And 10th, they are being subjected to arbitrary detention because there is, in fact, no legal basis for them to be detained on an ongoing manner. In response to Félix's legal detention, we submitted an urgent appeal to the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture on June 11th, 2021. In our appeal, we requested the Special Rapporteur, Dr. Nils Melzer, to act urgently to assist Félix, opening up an immediate investigation into his treatment and reaching out to the government of Nicaragua to demand proof of life and ensure his physical and mental integrity are respected. This morning, we submitted an urgent appeal, which you can find in the chat box, to the UN Special Rapporteur on the independence of judges and lawyers regarding the case of Juan Sebastián. Given that Juan Sebastián was subjected to flagrant violations of Nicaraguan and international law, it is clear he remains at risk of having his rights further violated by Nicaragua's manipulated judicial system. Friends, what we have seen in the last week is nothing less than a full assault on Nicaragua's democracy by Daniel Ortega and his regime. But as Berta and Victoria have shown us today, we are strongest when we stand together. Daniel Ortega may think that arresting his opponents and critics is a sign of strength, but we know that strong leaders don't need to threaten or detain or disappear their challengers. If Daniel Ortega was a strong and admired leader, he would be able to win an election against any opponents. But by detaining and disappearing Félix, Juan Sebastián, and their fellow opposition leaders, Ortega has shown the international community that he can't win in a fair fight. He is weak and vulnerable. He knows he has lost popular support and legitimacy, and he is very afraid. He knows better than anyone that this crackdown is the only way he can maintain his iron grip on power. Over the last week, we've seen an outpouring of support from the international community for Félix, Juan Sebastián, and their fellow opposition leaders being persecuted by the Ortega regime. We are heartened by these statements of support, which show that the international community will not tolerate this attack on Nicaraguan democracy. We must continue to urge the United Nations, the Organization of American States, governments around the world, human rights groups, and the media to shine a bright light on the egregious abuses of Ortega's regime. We must send a clear message that the world is watching. Continue to demand that the Ortega regime immediately and unconditionally release Félix, Juan Sebastián, and the over 130 other political prisoners it currently holds captive. We know that free and fair elections cannot happen in Nicaragua unless opposition leaders are allowed to participate freely and fairly. We will continue to do everything we can to secure the release of Félix and Juan Sebastián and all of the other political prisoners in Nicaragua, and we will never stop fighting together for a free, fair, and just Nicaragua. Thank you. I will now open up the floor to questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please post your name and news organization in the chat box, and I will call on you in the order in which you requested to ask a question. I will ask those journalists, those people on the call who are not journalists, to refrain from asking any questions until any and all questions from journalists have been asked and answered. In addition, my colleague Michael Russo will be in a position to be able to translate any questions that are presented in Spanish, translating them to English, and he can also translate as well any answers that I give into Spanish, as well as any answers that Berta and Victoria might give in either direction. So with that, the floor is open to questions, and I welcome anyone to just put their name and title and news organization into the chat box if you'd like to ask a question.
I will just translate very quickly. Ahora vamos a responder a preguntas de periodistas que son parte de la llamada de hoy. Si le gustaría hacer una pregunta, por favor, ponga su nombre y su organización en el chat. Y a los que no son periodistas, si tienen preguntas, por favor, esperen al final después de que los periodistas han hecho sus preguntas. Me llamo Michael Russo, yo soy colega de Jerry Genser, yo hablo español, y por eso con mucho gusto puedo ofrecer traducciones o facilitar una conversación traducida entre inglés y español. Gracias.
So the first question is from Jeff Ernst, a freelance journalist. Just to be clear, is there any indication of what jail or jails that Chamorro and Maradiaga are being held in? In short, we just simply don't know. There are a lot of people similarly situated in Nicaragua that have been held in Chipote prison, but we have no idea, in fact, if they are there. Neither the family nor legal counsel has seen them or been provided any confirmation by the Nicaraguan government of where specifically they are being detained. So at this stage, we don't know where they are, and we will only know where they are when they have been given regular access to their family and to legal counsel. The next question here is Hatzel Vela with WPLG TV in Miami. She wants to know what else can the international community do in the short term to help with the possible release of all those detained, especially the U.S. government. Perhaps I'll let Berta or Victoria respond, and I can add any additional comments that they on top of theirs. Berta or Victoria, do you want to offer a comment on that?
Quizás solamente decir que nuestro llamado a la comunidad internacional es precisamente hacer uso de todos los mecanismos internacionales que hay para instar al régimen a buscar una salida por la vía democrática y a respetar los convenios internacionales a los cuales ellos están suscritos. Sabemos que los gobiernos tienen mecanismos también para lograr comunicación, y eso es lo que nosotros estamos instando. En particular, el gobierno de Estados Unidos nos ha manifestado de que están dando seguimiento muy de cerca a lo que ocurre en Nicaragua y que ellos están comprometidos en hacer todo lo que esté a su alcance para lograr la liberación de los presos políticos, pero también para lograr una transición por la vía democrática. En este sentido, las elecciones son ese mecanismo que tenemos a disposición, y así que esperamos que el resto de gobiernos también puedan sumarse a estos esfuerzos.
Just to say that our call to the international community is to make use of all of the international mechanisms that exist to urge the regime to allow a democratic or to pass through the characteristics of a democracy, but also to comply with Nicaragua's obligations under international law to respect human rights. For example, the United States is following very closely what is happening in Nicaragua to ensure that democratic elections can take place, but also the freeing of political prisoners. And we urge all governments to do the same.
And I would just reiterate, I think, on top of that, we intend to explore every possible avenue to apply pressure onto the government of Nicaragua by engaging in discussions with the United Nations, the Organization of American States, the United States, and other like-minded governments around the world with human rights groups and others. Undoubtedly, there needs to be a whole global system response to what is happening in Nicaragua, given how rapidly the situation is deteriorating and the extraordinary impunity with which Ortega and his regime have been operating. Let's go on to the next question, which I'll pose to each of Berta and Victoria to just provide direct answers to the questions. The question is from David Adams with Univision. Has there been any communication between the families and the Nicaraguan authorities regarding the whereabouts of their loved ones? Have the Nicaraguan authorities responded at all to the concerns of their families? Perhaps we'll start with Victoria this time, if you want to answer that in either Spanish or English or both. And then Michael can translate as necessary.
Desde la semana de la detención de Juan, no hemos recibido ninguna notificación o comunicado de parte del gobierno de dónde está mi esposo y su situación actual, y no se le ha tampoco dejado que lo represente su defensa. La respuesta es no. No sabemos dónde está, ni lo hemos visto, ni su abogado lo ha podido ver.
Since the detention of Juan Sebastián a week ago, we have not heard anything from the government about where he is or his status. So the answer to your question is no, we do not know his location, and his lawyer has not been able to access him.
Berta, do you want to just summarize the situation for Félix?
Yes. En nuestro caso pasa lo mismo. Ni su abogado ni su familia ha podido tener noticias de él, no lo han podido ver. No sabemos su estado, no nos han informado tampoco de manera oficial. Todo lo que hemos sabido acerca del caso de Félix ha sido porque el gobierno hace sus comunicados, que por cierto los hace a la manera como a ellos les conviene. En el caso de nosotros, interpusimos el viernes pasado un recurso de exhibición personal para básicamente una prueba de vida. Y el gobierno respondió de forma tardía, y en el comunicado que hicieron, mencionan en una línea que pudo conversar con su defensora allá en Nicaragua, cosa que no es cierta. Y a nosotros eso nos preocupa porque ellos hacen ver como que sí hemos tenido contacto, pero en realidad no. Y realmente es una angustia porque no sabemos lo que le puede pasar. Conocemos del riesgo, pero la incertidumbre realmente es algo que nos preocupa mucho.
In Felix's case, it is the same. Neither his family nor his lawyer has been informed about his status or his location. They've received nothing official from the government. Last week, they filed what's called an appeal for personal appearance as a proof of life. To make sure that as a proof of life in Felix's case, the government or the court denied this, saying that Felix did in fact have a meeting with a lawyer, but it is not a lawyer that the family appointed. And his family appointed lawyers nor his family have not had any contact with him since his detention. And just to close by saying that the uncertainty is extremely challenging and very difficult.
Let me just mention on top of that, under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, a person who's been detained on potential criminal charges or actual charges has a right to access counsel of their choosing. That is the exact words. So it is another flagrant violation of international law if in fact it's the case, and we don't know, that Félix has been provided some kind of state-appointed defense counsel. He has a right to choose his own lawyer and does not have to accept and should not have to accept a lawyer appointed by the government of Nicaragua. Of course, this is what we've heard, but we don't know if in fact this is the case because no one has accessed Felix.
I'll now read the next question, which is from Perla Pineda from El Economista en México. ¿Consideran que la comunidad internacional no ha tenido una participación activa para llamar a una estabilidad en Nicaragua? ¿Y cómo creen que puede cooperar con la comunidad internacional? Berta y Victoria. Just in English to translate as well, do you consider that the international community has not had an active participation in calling for stability in Nicaragua? And how can the international community cooperate in this way?
I'll let Victoria or Berta perhaps respond to this question.
Yo solo quisiera decir que la comunidad internacional sí ha tratado, ha hecho cosas por liberar presos políticos y la democratización de Nicaragua, pero mi llamado es a que siempre se puede hacer más. La situación en el país ha escalado, entonces el llamado de Berta y mío en este momento es que siempre se puede hacer más para que los derechos humanos de nuestros familiares sean respetados y ellos sean liberados, que es lo que queremos.
To say that the international community has done a number of things working to free political prisoners, but the real answer is that they can always do more to continue to protect the rights of those in Nicaragua, but also to free political prisoners that are held by the Ortega regime.
All right, Michael, do you want to read the next one in Spanish from Carlos Larios? And then translate, please.
Perdón. ¿Qué incidencia puede tener en Nicaragua las diligencias legales que hagan en el extranjero? El régimen alega que cualquier resolución internacional no es vinculante, pero ente no cumple con ellas. Asking what kind of legal work outside of Nicaragua, what kind of effect does that have inside Nicaragua? The regime says that any international resolutions from other multilateral international bodies is not binding, and therefore they do not comply with them.
So my response would be to say that, in fact, that's not accurate in terms of what the government of Nicaragua is claiming. You know, when a government signs and ratifies a treaty, as it has in the case of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, it gives license and authority to the international community to render judgments about whether or not it's complying with its obligations under that treaty. That's only reinforced by the Constitution of Nicaragua, which makes very clear that that the government of Nicaragua itself must comply with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. In fact, that treaty makes clear as well that when you're a party to the treaty, that the government in question must be sure and make sure and immediately that all of its laws, all of its domestic laws are in compliance with the obligations under that treaty. And so the change in the law that now purports to allow a judge in a secret hearing to order a judicial detention for 90 days is in fact an illegal law. And it's an illegal law because it violates numerous provisions of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which supersedes attempts to try to adopt domestic laws. And in particular, that violates, as I was mentioning before, the presumption of innocence, the right to access to counsel, including of your own choosing, as well as the right to, at the time of detention, to challenge the legality, and the underlying basis for why you are detained, and numerous other provisions as well. So, the government of Nicaragua can assert or claim whatever it wants, but no international lawyer with any basic background in how international treaties operate and function would agree with an assessment that somehow Nicaragua can shield itself from judgments of the international community as to how its actions are not compatible with its obligations under its own constitution and the international treaty I've been referencing. I will also note that in short order, we will be filing cases before the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, which is a specialist body based in Geneva that was created by the UN Commission on Human Rights and extended by the UN Human Rights Council. And that will provide a legal venue to adjudicate the individual cases separately of both Félix and Juan.
Thank you, Jared. A su pregunta, señor, cuando un gobierno se involucra a un tratado internacional como el Pacto Internacional de Derechos Civiles y Políticos, permite que la comunidad internacional asegura que este país cumpla con sus obligaciones bajo el marco del derecho internacional. Pero también es importante reconocer que el Pacto Internacional de Derechos Civiles y Políticos también es parte de la ley nicaragüense, porque está parte del artículo 46 de la Constitución nicaragüense. Y también es importante reconocer que varias acciones en estos casos son violaciones de la ley internacional, del derecho internacional, pero también que el Pacto Internacional de Derechos Civiles y Políticos supersede la ley nacional nicaragüense. Por eso el gobierno de Nicaragua puede decir lo que quiera, pero ningún abogado internacional estará de acuerdo que las acciones del gobierno de Nicaragua son en acuerdo con sus obligaciones del Pacto Internacional de Derechos Civiles y Políticos y también de su constitución doméstica. Una cosa solamente para añadir es que en breve vamos a presentar casos ante el grupo de trabajo sobre detención arbitraria en la ONU. Es una organización en Ginebra, una organización que fue creada por la Comisión de Derechos Humanos de la ONU. Es una jurisdicción legal para presentar estos casos. I believe, Jared, the next question is from Tim Rogers.
Okay, just take a look here. Sorry.
That's okay. At this point, are Félix and Juan Sebastián considered political prisoners, political kidnapping victims, and 3 disappeared?
Political prisoners, kidnapping, and disappeared. So they're definitely considered political prisoners, although political prisoners itself doesn't really have a precise definition under international law. In essence, if you were to look, for example, at what Amnesty International has used the term prisoners of conscience, they're people who are detained for who they are or what they believe, who have neither used nor advocated violence. And undoubtedly, both Félix and Juan meet that definition. They're also political prisoners because the allegations that are being made against them are undoubtedly and exclusively political. But the broader term under international law that is generally used is arbitrary detention, detention that's in violation of countries' obligations under their own and international law. Political prisoners would be one subset of a group of people who are arbitrarily detained. Another subset, for example, if you're in fact guilty of committing a crime and there are terrible due process abuses, you could also be considered arbitrarily detained, but you wouldn't be a political prisoner. In this case, there has been both political and pretextual charges laid against both men, and they've been victims of egregious due process abuses. And so therefore they are clearly political prisoners. As to, kind of their current status, as people who have been disappeared, they remain disappeared. As of today, we don't know where they are or what condition that they are in. And neither family nor counsel has been able to access them for now, more than a week. So they are definitely, also disappeared. I'm sorry, what was the second one, Michael? The was a political prisoner,
political kidnapping.
Political kidnapping, yeah. I mean, again, there's no definition of political kidnapping, but this is in essence an institutional abduction. When the state grabs a person without an arrest warrant and takes them to a secret location and disappears them, undoubtedly this is the equivalent of a political kidnapping. Just speaking generally, not as a purely legal question, but just describing what has happened here is that, yes, this would be considered a political kidnapping as well.
I'll now read the next question which is directed to Victoria Cárdenas. Doña Victoria, ¿cuál es su situación judicial? ¿Está bajo arresto domiciliar? In English, Victoria, can you please explain your legal situation? Are you under house arrest?
De hace un año tenemos mi mamá, mi hermana y yo un juicio penal donde se nos ordenó orden de captura. Ese juicio quedó abierto y inmediatamente después se comenzó un juicio civil. Entonces, y tenemos un año de estar con nuestra defensa presentando todas nuestras pruebas de que todo el proceso es ilegal, todo se nos ha negado y estamos ahorita ya en proceso de que las 7 propiedades embargadas ya sean subastadas. Yo no tengo casa por cárcel. El que tenía casa por cárcel antes de ser detenido era mi esposo. Lo que sí todavía tengo es una orden de captura vigente porque el proceso sigue vigente.
Just to translate for this, for 1 year, Victoria and her relatives have been involved in a civil case for which the Nicaraguan police have issued an order for her arrest. The process is completely illegal. The one who was under house arrest before his detention was her husband. She is not under house arrest, but there is a warrant out from the Nicaraguan police for her arrest, given pursuant to that process.
All right. Let's see.
Leaves as though the following 2 questions were very similar to that question.
Yeah, I think that there is also a question that relates to for you, Victoria, of can you describe what happened when the arrest took place? It was obviously a very dramatic and terrible moment with 40 plus police storming your home, but if you can talk about that in a little more detail.
Sí, el día martes 8 de junio, mi esposo recibió una citatoria para el miércoles para presentarse a las 8:30. Pero ese mismo día, a las 2 horas de haber recibido la citatoria, alrededor de 6, 8 patrullas, no sé cuántas, llegaron a las 7 de la noche, llegaron de una manera violenta a mi casa. Los policías, en vez de entrar por el portón principal, se comenzaron a tirar el muro, o sea, se saltaron el muro. En ese momento ya, después de que oímos el ruido y los gritos, mi esposo y yo ya estábamos solos en la casa. Él se puso de rodillas, subió las manos y dijo, aquí estoy. Ellos no hicieron caso, siguieron queriendo botar el portón. Yo les decía que por favor yo lo iba a abrir, pero tenemos un portón eléctrico. Entonces yo fui a la casa, me gritaban que lo abriera, y yo fui, lo abrí, y en el momento que yo lo abrí, agarraron a mi esposo que estaba arrodillado con las manos arriba y se lo llevaron. Yo les pregunté que por qué se lo estaban llevando, no me contestaron, y en ese momento yo vi que varias patrullas se fueron. A mi casa entraron 2 patrullas y otras 2 o más quedaron afuera. En algún momento yo llegué a contar más de 25, 30 policías uniformados, armados, unos de negro y otros de uniforme policial, que quedaron en mi casa rodeándome. Les expliqué que estaba sola y que yo estaba dispuesta a colaborar con ellos, pero que por favor bajaran la violencia, porque nosotros éramos personas pacíficas y que no estábamos haciendo nada y mi esposo no se estaba corriendo de ellos. En ese momento 5 personas estuvieron en mi casa por 4 horas revisando toda mi casa, y después de 4 horas ellos se se fueron y se fue toda la policía con ellos.
Gracias, señor Victoria. Regarding the moment of the arrest on Monday, June 8th, her husband received a citation to appear on Wednesday. Shortly thereafter, 6 or 8 patrol cars arrived at their house around 7 in the evening. They entered through the main gate, they jumped the wall, and Juan Sebastián and Victoria heard the sounds and the shouts from the exterior. Her husband put his hands up. Victoria opened the door because the door is electric and they didn't want to break it. And once they opened the door, the police took Juan Sebastián away. Victoria asked the police why they took Juan Sebastián away. They did not respond and they didn't say anything. Then there were about 25 police officers in the house of the blue and black police. Victoria asked them to refrain from violence and emphasized that we are nonviolent people. We will cooperate. We're not armed, and that her husband was not fleeing from them. After 4 hours of searching the house, the police left.
All right. Well, I think we are coming to the end of the press briefing here. Let me just see if I think we'll take one final question. And can you just translate that from Jeff, please?
From Jeff Ernst, who's an independent journalist. Para Berta o Victoria, siguen con la esperanza que la situación política en Nicaragua se puede resolver por la vía electoral. And just to translate in English from Jeff Ernst, the independent journalist, for either Berta or Victoria, do you have hope that the political situation in Nicaragua can be changed through the electoral path?
Yo quisiera comentar de que el pueblo de Nicaragua quiere una transición pacífica hacia la democracia. Y la elección, digamos, las elecciones son esa vía. Nosotros creemos y demandamos por nuestro derecho ciudadano a que esas elecciones sean lo más transparentes, observadas y libres para poder alcanzar esa transición. Sin embargo, el mayor desafío que tenemos es que el gobierno logre respetar la voluntad del pueblo. Y con el arresto de 4 precandidatos presidenciales, podemos ver que realmente no existe esa voluntad. Nuestros esposos, además de la candidata Cristiana Chamorro o Arturo Cruz, eran parte de esas opciones para la elección popular y su detención sencillamente le niega el derecho a la ciudadanía a poder elegir a sus gobernantes. Entonces, que todavía tenemos la esperanza de que se logre a través de este llamado de la comunidad internacional a que hayan estas elecciones. Y deben de ser elecciones observadas, porque de lo contrario, el régimen continuará utilizando las instituciones del gobierno para establecer su voluntad, incluyendo el poder electoral, que hemos visto también que ha sido manipulado y utilizado conforme a las intenciones del régimen por permanecer en el poder. Y según las últimas conversaciones que yo tuve con mi esposo, con Félix me decía de que no queremos más derramamiento de sangre ni más violencia en nuestro país, y que el Estado de Nicaragua debe de respetar la voluntad del pueblo y cumplir con este mandato, ¿no? de una elección transparente y ordenada.
Yo estoy totalmente de acuerdo con lo que Berta ha manifestado y también quiero reiterar que estos precandidatos, mi marido, la lucha ha sido cívica. Lo que se quiere es un cambio cívico en paz. No queremos más violencia, no queremos más derramamiento de sangre, no queremos guerra. Queremos prosperidad y paz para Nicaragua. Democracia, justicia. Gracias.
Gracias a ustedes dos. The most important thing is that the Nicaraguan people want a peaceful path forward to democracy. Says Berta, we want and demand that these elections are transparent with observers to make that transition possible. The biggest challenge to that is that the government does not respect the will of the people. By arresting the 4 presidential candidates, it's clear that they don't respect the will of the people and are denying the people's right to choose their own leaders. Without observation, the regime will continue to manipulate its institutions to consolidate its power. And in one of their last conversations, most recent conversations, Félix told Berta that we do not want the spilling of blood, or we don't want any more violence in the country. We want this transition to take place peacefully. Victoria is totally in agreement with Berta. She iterates that the fight of the candidates has been civil and has been peaceful. We do not want war or the spilling of blood. We want peace and justice, and that is all. Thank you.
Well, thank you to everyone. Muchas gracias a todos. And this will now bring our press briefing to a conclusion. Thank you for participating today. If you have any questions, I think you know how to find us. And we will be sending out a short time later, the next hour or so, a press release summarizing the discussion today, and also including a link to the video for those who would want to be able to access it, that we'll post on YouTube. And obviously this fight will continue until it is done. And we will continue to, to work intensely and as rapidly as possible to try to bring Félix and Juan home to their families, and of course to secure the release of the more than 130 political prisoners in Nicaragua. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.